Hello. On behalf of the Council on Library and Information Resources, I want to welcome you to today's sponsors webinar, The Changing Landscape of Library and Information Services, What Presidents, Provosts, and Financial Officers Need to Know. My name is Kathleen Smith, and I'll be facilitating today's session. You'll see that there is a chat window located to the right side of your screen. Feel free to type any questions you may have in the text box at the bottom of the chat window and hit Enter to send. At the end of the presentation today, we will be taking questions from our audience, and we'll ask you to post your questions in the chat window at that time. Today's webinar will conclude by 2 p.m. Eastern Time. If at any time during the webinar you experience technical difficulties, please send a private chat over one of their names and click on the private chat option. You may also send Rita or Louisa an email at the emails listed in the chat box. Also note that you may exit and re-enter the webinar at any time. Today's webinar is being recorded. A link to the recording from today's session will be sent to you within the next day or two. Finally, we invite you to tweet about today's session with our handle @ClearNews and hashtag #EdFuture. Joining us today are Richard Holmgren, Jean Spencer, and Linda Demerit. Rick is Vice President of Information Services and Assessment at Allegheny College and is co-author of the white paper. Rick has served Allegheny in a variety of roles, including Associate Dean, since arriving as Associate Professor of Mathematics in 1988. He has managed Allegheny's library and IT services for most of the past decade. Jean Spencer is Chief Information Officer and leader of emerging library and IT organization at Ursinus College. Prior to that, he served as an independent consultant to higher education, library, and IT organizations. Jean facilitated the retreat of CLIR CIOs that provided much of the content for the white paper, which he co-authored with Rick. Linda Demerit is Provost and Dean of the College and Allegheny's Chief Academic Officer. She works closely with the faculty and the President to help shape and manage the academic program. She has a PhD in German literature and taught in the Department of Modern Languages for 21 years prior to her appointment as Dean of the College in 2003. Welcome to our guests, and thank you for agreeing to be part of today's webinar. For our agenda today, Rick and Jean will first discuss the context of the white paper and recent trends and opportunities for library and information services organizations. Linda will discuss how Allegheny College is reimagining the library to support student success. Rick and Jean will then discuss necessary skills for LITS staff and strategic roles for library and technology leaders. At the end of their presentation, we will open the webinar to questions from participants. Now, I'd like to turn things over to our first speaker, Rick Holmgren.
Thanks, Kathleen. Today's session, as Kathleen mentioned, draws on a white paper that emerged from a meeting of the CLIR CIOs, which is a small group of CIOs responsible for merged library and IT organizations, and we meet a couple times each year. The group decided last year to dedicate its December meeting to the problem of developing a strategic vision for LITS organizations. We wanted to answer the question, if we were starting fresh, that's building a brand new information services organization for a brand new college, what services and infrastructure would we create to meet the needs of this new campus? We assumed that there wouldn't be any legacy infrastructure. So there's no college. There's no college, right? There's no library. There's no network. There are no existing personnel. So we're really doing, it's a greenfield implementation. So if we were to start, if we were building an organization with the idea of a college starting 5 or 10 years from now, what would we imagine that we might need to support that institution? And as we planned for our meeting, it quickly became clear that we'd really benefit from a more structured approach, which is why we invited Jean to help us design a workshop and lead us in a discussion that would perhaps surface some answers to that question. And our discussion was framed by the larger issues facing higher ed, and I'm sure you're familiar with these, but we'll just kind of review. As we all know, our costs are going up often faster than inflation in many areas. At the same time, we're seeing flat or declining in real terms net revenues per student. So already we're in a bit of a bind here because our revenues aren't keeping up with our costs. At the same time, the landscape around us is changing really rapidly. New technologies emerge daily. There are new providers of higher ed that are taking different approaches to education. often approaches that challenge the assumptions that support our business model, competency-based education being just one example. And then we have shifting public perception. It wasn't that long ago that we could assume that most people assume that a college education was worth it. It's something that we all should aspire to. But we see increasingly now in the popular press more articles with the underlying question of is college really worth the investment that it requires? So it's a really challenging landscape, even apart from the escalating costs and flat revenues. So in the CIO discussion and the subsequent development of the white paper, we quickly realized that effective strategic planning for an LITS organization that's a Library and Information Technology Services organization is not something that can be done just by the library organization or the IT organization or the CIO working alone. It needs to engage the entire campus community. The ultimate value of information services will depend on the degree to which those services respond to institutional needs, and the institution must be part of shaping that vision and articulating those needs so that the institution is invested in realizing the vision. As one example, if our vision involves implementing a customer relationship management system or CRM for enrollment or alumni affairs or development, then those offices need to be involved in defining the vision. The LITS group can implement the technology, the CRM technology, but for the institution to really benefit in the way that it should from that technology, the participating department needs to be involved. So we have to get all the users really invested in taking full advantage of that new technology. As another example, the library might lead an initiative to embrace open access publishing, but it's not going to be successful unless faculty and the academic administration participate as full partners. If the whole campus does not own the vision, it's not reasonable to expect the campus to partner in its implementation. With that in mind, Jean and I chose to address the paper to a broader audience, one that includes presidents, provosts, and CFOs. As we started that endeavor, we also had to wrestle with kind of the competing understanding of LITS organizations. On the one hand, we have library and information technology as a cost center or utility. And on the other hand, we think of library and information technology as a strategic player in a campus effort to identify and exploit opportunities to strengthen the institution's programs, market position, or bottom line. Now, if we think about it as a utility, the management goal is going to be to reduce costs while maintaining acceptable levels of service. And it's certainly true that there are opportunities in library and information technology to reduce costs while maintaining services. However, we believe the largest institutional gains will come from positioning LITS as a strategic partner, embracing opportunities to improve institutional performance. But before we unpack that claim, perhaps Jean can provide us an overview of the Clear Cio Workshop.
Hey, thanks, Rick. So we began our work on the day of our workshop looking at the recent changes that information services kinds of organizations have experienced with a goal of identifying trajectories or vectors and underlying features that could suggest where they might be going over the next decade. It's difficult to sit back and imagine what might occur 10 years hence, but what we tried to do was to develop those vectors that would help us predict where that we might see trends. Increasingly, we see users are being empowered by their ability to find and manage services on their own. They do that much more independently than they've ever done before. We are all experience heightened expectations about services from virtually every corner of the campus. The use of digital resources, much of it from off campus, has become a significant part of everyday life of our students, faculty, and staff. And we're seeing a fundamental shift from a predominance of boutique scale services, something that is developed here just for our own use, to services that are more commonly built on a cloud scale. For example, email shifting to Google, or being able to purchase individual journals from a large repository of articles and publications rather than just the ones we happen to own here on campus. So turning to the future, the workshop participants began identifying emerging opportunities that could align with these changes and vectors that we imagined in the future. So as we looked into the future, we thought that emerging enterprise technologies, particularly core administrative functions, could be delivered from cloud providers with significant opportunities to improve the experience of students, their families, employees, and other stakeholders, while simultaneously decreasing costs. The cloud-based collaboration suites, such as Google Apps and Microsoft Office 365, have already transformed the way that many campuses use email and support it. Calendaring and other collaboration tools as well. Over the coming decade, we expect that campuses will increasingly find opportunities with cloud-based providers of core services for things like CRM systems, library search tools, learning management systems, library management systems, financial management, student information systems, human resource management, data analysis, and other similar tools. I think the list will go on of the things that we'll increasingly find available in that kind of environment. Although these cloud-based systems promise to reduce or at least limit the growth in costs associated with more traditional technologies, they replace the real opportunity is the way implementing these systems opens the opportunity to fundamentally change the way that our institutions work. So let me give you an example. A campus is implementing a CRM system for enrollment. They have the opportunity to dramatically change the way that they interact with students, provide different communications to different people at the time that communication is most likely to be received favorably, and thus deepening their engagement with the institution and enhancing yield. While implementing that system, the campus can move functions from manual, paper-based interactions to more automated, fully electronic workflows, thus freeing staff time to work more directly with students who have deeper concerns or issues. This kind of change can play huge dividends in terms of student engagement and yield. Since electronic interactions also produce a stream of data about student engagement, the institution has the opportunity in subsequent years to mine that data for clues in how it can improve the process and better respond to student interest. In the library, digital tools such as WorldShare and integrated discovery tools are transforming the information landscape, allowing researchers to interact with local and distant resources at the same time. Interconnected digital repositories can allow local resources and scholarship to be connected to that of other similar institutions, so we become part of a larger, more integrated whole. Similarly, the transition from print to digital affects more than the way that we process data and allocate staff time. Historically, the storage and management of print materials was a first priority in library design. As the size of the library's physical collection now shrinks, space becomes available to other purposes. Given the library's historical role as the focal point for student research, study, and support, institutions would be wise to consider how they might take advantage of newly reclaimed space to support student success in other ways. The library has an opportunity here to lead in this process or to be dragged along by it. Linda, do you want to talk a little bit about how Allegheny is reimagining its library building as an academic commons?
Thank you, Jean, and yes, I would be happy to do that. So over the past decade, Allegheny has been reshaping its library building and its students' experience of that building. And when the newly renovated main floor opens this coming January, we will have a fully realized academic commons. That academic commons, as you can see on the screen, includes 4 major elements. So first of all, there is the traditional student study space and collaboration space. Obviously, we need to have the traditional library services like research assistants and access to materials for academic work. We also then have included, this happened in 2006, a learning commons, which is a comprehensive academic support system or center added to the main floor of the library. And we are just now completing the renovation of the library again to add the Allegheny Gateway to communities, cultures, and careers. And this new center is designed to prepare students for entry into the world and to help them apply their academic work to contemporary issues in the community and the workplace. So again, providing student study space and traditional library services has obviously been part of the library's mission for most of its history. And then in the 2006 renovation, to bring the Learning Commons into the building, we added a number of areas designed to support collaborative work in addition to the academic support services provided by the Learning Commons. So the Learning Commons is really all about bringing into one space to make kind of a one-stop shopping area for all academic support services for our students. But at the same time, we were implementing that, we realized that student work nowadays is actually much more collaborative than it was maybe 10 or 20 years ago, and so we added a lot of collaborative study space as well. And then the current renovation completes the transformation of the library building by adding the Allegheny Gateway. So the Learning Commons takes a holistic approach to supporting student success while the students are at Allegheny. And the Allegheny Gateway extends that holistic approach to prepare students for success in a rapidly changing multicultural world when they leave Allegheny. So the Gateway is really a gateway to communities, cultures, and careers, certainly while they're at Allegheny, but importantly also after they're at Allegheny. The Gateway brings together a rich array of offices and programs formally housed across campus. These include career education, pre-professional advising and support, international education, diversity education, undergraduate research, and civic engagement. It's probably useful for you to know that in our most recent strategic plan, we had 3 main priorities, and those were civic education, diversity education, and international education. And so those 3 priorities are brought together in the Gateway and combined with career education. Student use of the library space more than tripled, and the use of library materials as measured by circulation statistics also increased significantly when we added the Learning Commons and student collaboration space to the library in 2006. We expect to see even greater gains in the use and vitality of the space as we bring the Gateway into the mix. So that's really the example about imagining or reimagining the space use of the library building, but that's certainly not the only opportunity that's presented by the new types of information services. Let me give you a couple more. A decade ago, Allegheny was seeking to build a more robust program in Middle Eastern and North African studies. And we wanted to explore offering Arabic as another option in our language programs. We didn't really think that we could offer a robust MENA studies program without having the language component there. However, adding a faculty member to try to develop a program is very expensive, as we all know, and if the program should not flourish, it can also be potentially devastating, not only for the faculty member, but also for any students who have been attracted to that program. So as an alternative, we brought in Arabic language courses from an established program via a teleconference link, and that was supplemented by language instruction and practice with a native speaker supported by a Fulbright fellowship. So the native speaker was working directly with our students, but the actual content and instruction was provided via the teleconference. We did that probably 4 or 5 years, and the program prospered, so that recently we were able to hire a tenure-track faculty member in Arabic language to further develop the program. Given the success of the Arabic program, we began piloting a program in Portuguese a few years ago using the same model. Some students have enrolled and had a very good experience, but the program has not attracted enough student interest to justify expanding it, and so it is likely that we will suspend it in the near future. Although we are sorry the program didn't grow enough to justify its ongoing support, this experiment at least was relatively low cost. A number of students did have a very good experience in introductory Portuguese, and we avoided creating issues for a faculty member who might have been recruited to try to start a new program. In all of these examples, we are trying to imagine how we might take advantage of rapidly changing information services to solve old problems in new ways. Of course, all of this is in hindsight, and I'm hoping that Jean and Rick now can provide us some insights as to how we might position ourselves in our information services units so that we are all ready to seize the next opportunity when it presents itself.
Thanks, Linda. I'll take in from here. One of the issues that came up over and over again as we talked through the workshop was the issue of collaboration and how it sort of ran through all of the examples we considered things that we might be asked to do in the future. Every one of the opportunities we imagine going forward involved us heavily collaborating with other parts of the campus. And so we really need to work on developing staff who are ready, willing, and able to support institutional collaboration in just about every endeavor that we take on. As we prepare our teams for the next several years, our primary goals have been to increase the quality and frequency of our communication, build our ability to work as partners with multiple campus constituencies, and position ourselves as trusted collaborators on multiple projects. Managing the systems that we work with is increasingly complex and difficult work, and we need to continue to maintain our technical skills on the back end while building new skills in contract development, vendor management, and other areas that are beyond what we typically do today. In addition, these new digital tools are generating a wealth of data that could be incredibly useful at our campuses, but only if it is well managed and integrated among systems. So therefore, data management and system integration work will continue to become increasingly important skill sets if we want to take full advantage of new analytic technologies now becoming available. Even as we're being asked to develop soft skills to work well with the campus constituencies, we're going to need to develop deep technical skills in even greater quantities, and probably in very different areas than we have traditionally held. Rick?
Yeah, Gene, I couldn't agree more. The balance between developing new technical skills and the soft skills and things like collaboration and facilitation is really essential. And so we need to develop the collaboration and facilitation skills for our teams at every level. I know as the CIO, I invest a good bit of my time working with my peers on the senior staff to be sure that all of us on the senior staff are on the same page in terms of project goals and resource investments. And then I know that the directors and project managers in my area spend a lot of time supporting communication and collaboration for their project teams, and often those teams include more individuals from outside the LITS organization than from within, so we're really reaching out beyond the edges of the institution. And on the frontline staff, it's the same story. They're all called upon, and increasingly so, called upon to collaborate with their peers from across campus. I think it's been hard work, and it's a real shift for the team to invest so much energy in communication and collaboration, but it seems to be paying some dividends. However, I'm convinced that campuses that want to take advantage of the strategic opportunities that are inherent in emerging library and technology tools have got to be willing to ask every division of the college, not just the library or technology groups, to invest in understanding those opportunities, identifying which make most sense for the particular institution, and supporting the collaboration required to seize the possibilities in each opportunity. The bottom line really is that it takes the whole campus to articulate and realize a vision for library and information technology services. It's not something that can be done by a library or technology group working alone. So we can go on at length about this stuff, and I'm really anxious to hear from our participants today, and so we'll leave time for questions, so I'll stop there. Kathleen, do you have questions for us?
Thank you, Rick, Jean, and Linda. You've given us a lot of food for thought, and now I'd like to invite our audience to submit their questions. As I noted earlier, you should feel free to type your question into the chat box, and we will engage our presenters in their additional discussion here. I actually had some people send me questions by email, so I'm going to start off with a couple that were sent earlier. This one is for Jean. The paper suggested something you called the Information Services Utility. Can you please say more about that?
Sure. Many of our organizations have historically played a utility role in managing services, supporting technology at the individual level, checking out books and returning them, keeping them on the shelf, very transactional kind of services. And as I've visited many institutions, there are those institutions that sort of keep their library and IT organizations relegated in that utility function. Our job is to manage transactions efficiently and manage costs, and there's a value to that. We have to make sure that the trains run on time, but there's also, I think, an associated cost to that. These organizations have the opportunity of playing a much more strategic role, and I think what we were trying to say there was to say, while having that utility function is important, it is not the only thing or the most important thing that we do, and that there was an opportunity for these library and IT organizations, properly led and properly connected to the campus community, to play a much more strategic role.
Great. I see that Mike has chimed in with a couple questions here. How do we make the case to administration that library IT are strategic assets? And related to that, from a provost perspective, why are library and IT the right strategic partnership? Linda, would you be interested in addressing the question about the provost perspective? And then Jean, do you want to chime back in on making the case to administration that they are strategic assets?
That would be fine with me. I had a lot of conversations with Rick about this, and he persuaded me that that the library and the IT are indeed the right strategic partnership. I think that when you look at doing research now, you can't, which is one of the primary tasks of the library, of course, you can't just do that with library resources any longer, and IT really has to be a part of doing the research, of writing the papers, of doing the citations, of presenting the information. It's not just the library that can be involved anymore. We have instructional technologists that work hand in hand with our reference librarians to help the students and the faculty with their various assignments for classes or for their senior project research. And they really need to know what the other hand is doing, the right hand and the left hand. So that's certainly a very pragmatic reason for bringing those two areas together. Also, when you start thinking about the development of curriculum, when I was talking about both the Arabic program and the Portuguese program, another example is we collaborate within the Global Liberal Arts Alliance. These are schools from the GLCA, the Great Lakes Colleges Association. There are 13 of them here in the United States. There are 13 others internationally, and we can bring international content directly into our classrooms in a much more robust, it's much more relevant because you're actually talking to people in these other cultures, and that's all through technology. You can't get something like that in a book, and so really the technology is also a way to bring bring people together, to bring content alive, to make it more interactive. I guess those are two examples, and I would invite Rick to either comment more on that strategic partnership since he's been leading it for 7 or 8 years, I guess.
Sure. Thanks, Linda. I guess I'll go first to the how do we make the case to administration that library and IT are strategic assets, and I think part of that has to do, again, it's about that partnership and about thinking about things from the institutional perspective. So as an example, in our current strategic plan, we have an initiative to build a center that brings together academic and student affairs and to try and create more momentum behind some of the initiatives in the plan around diversity and internationalization, for example. And it didn't say in there, build a center in the library. It said, how do we go about doing that? And so one of my roles really was as a member of the senior team is to think about, are there things that we bring to the table from library and IT that we might be able to use to support that initiative? And so we have some of the initiatives like bringing Arabic into the classroom that Linda, bringing Arabic to the college was one Linda's already mentioned. But the other is when we look at the academic commons to begin thinking about, it's a natural evolution for the library, or the library facility, given the direction things are going. And it also supports a strategic initiative for the college. And so we're really looking at, and that's what I'm really talking about here in terms of partnership, is we have to think about what are the institutional needs right now? Where does IT fit into that need perspective? How is it that we can partner with the institution in ways that'll help the institution be more successful and at the same time help us be more successful as a library IT organization? So I hope that gets a bit, at least, to Mike's question.
If I could add just one more thing, stepping back from a little bit higher perspective on this, the advances in the digital environment as people perceive it in their lives is significant and pervasive, and it's driven by off-campus forces, but people are interacting with digital stuff all the time. And at the same time, threats to higher education as we currently know it are coming by way of these digital changes. So there's opportunities in the digital world that are creating challenges for us that we need to respond to. It seems to me that it would be a fairly obvious connection to think that the library and IT, who are going to be campus experts in the digital resources and services, may be able to help in a significant way. And I also think that there's a significant potential in the transformational nature of digital tools and information that would just be of significant interest to the provost and other members of the senior staff, given the right kind of leadership in those organizations and having an organization position itself in the right way.
If I could just, if I could just also add on to what Jean was just saying, I mean, obviously, when you start to look at something like the CRM, it just allows you to do so much more in enrollment and development, really in whatever areas you use something like that. And so it has a lot also to do with cost and efficiency and making sure that we're doing, using our dollars the best way possible. So I found in the article very interesting, very interesting, the statement that at the same time that technology is a cost center, it is also a tool that can help us contain costs or be more efficient.
Could I see a question from Roberta here that I think follows kind of along the same line about, do faculty and administrators generally understand what libraries can do, or how can libraries educate them? And I mean, that's a really good question, and I think the answer to the first one, do faculty administrators generally understand what libraries can do? And I think the answer is probably no, just because they don't have the experience necessarily to see that, and so that's part of, I guess, again, what I think I'm trying to advocate here is that we think about how do we help people understand, and the best way to help people understand, this goes back to my background as a faculty member, you have to start with the questions that matter to the student, to the learner, right? So if we want faculty and administrators to learn more about what's going on in the library, we have to start with questions that really matter to them, right? And so on some campuses, that might be an initiative around information literacy, and I think the library is a natural partner for that, but the questions really need to be driven by, I think in the best case scenario, are driven by the faculty questions around information literacy. Something that has been somewhat of a conversation for us here at Allegheny off and on for the last few years is we're generating all this digital stuff, right? We've got images, we've got videos, we've got various kinds of artifacts coming out of classroom work, and people are beginning to wonder, like, how do we manage this stuff? How do we store it? How do we index it? What does metadata even mean? How does that all work? So that 5-10 years from now we can find what we're looking for. That's a great opportunity for the library to partner with faculty and administrators and help them on both. And again, administrators, athletics departments generate a ton, at least on our campus, of digital media. It's a good opportunity for the library to partner with the athletics department and talk about how do we manage those materials. So I think that's the kind of initiative I'm hoping, or I'm suggesting that we might want to pursue, is to think about what are the questions that matter to the faculty and administrators.
And Rick, that's a good point. And I think those questions will differ from place to place. Different institutions will have a different set of questions, and in some institutions, the thing that really matters is space on campus. And if the library can be proactive in thinking about what other partners ought to be invited into the library space to create a greater support environment for students and faculty, while giving up some of the space that's holding materials that are very, very rarely used, then that could be a win for a campus. If other campuses are concerned about the quality of student independent research, and then finding ways to provide a much more effective research support operation rather than just, sitting at a seldom visited reference desk, that might catch the appeal of the administrators who are trying to move that institution to a greater support of the independent research. So the questions, the opportunities to have a greater impact will be different on different campuses, but in many ways, the success in that requires us to step back and say, how do I rethink what we do here at a library or an IT organization to make sure we're aligned with what the campus' greatest goals and priorities are?
I can give a very specific example of that, actually. This is what happened when we decided to put the new gateway into the library. What we wanted to do, we have 3 centers right now on campus, and I think a lot of places have 3 centers on their campuses, one for civic engagement and one for multicultural affairs, and then the third is for international programs. And what we were looking for from a strategic point of view was how to bring those 3 areas together so that each would mutually inform the other. We think that the diversity movement's emphasis on the context and historical background is really necessary in order to make sure that our civic engagement work is more than service, that it also is understanding the reasons for poverty and maybe action steps and policy decisions that are made that either increase poverty or not. So it's not just service, it's informed by insights of both the diversity movements and the international movements. And we wanted that interdisciplinary and integrative thinking to happen among those 3 areas of our strategic plan. So we knew that we needed to find a space that was large enough and could contain those areas. And at the same time, we saw a lot of overlap also or potential for productive collaborations between the Learning Commons and the new gateway. When we start talking about student success at the front end as students come in, the Learning Commons has the writing center and the speech center and the tutoring and so if you bring those areas all together into one space, you're going to have a lot of good communications, and you're going to be able to take one student who maybe wanders into the civic engagement office and say, hey, listen, we can't really help you here, but I'll take you over to the international office because we have a great internship opportunity over there I know of that where you can connect an international experience also with some community-based research or service abroad. So I think that's another good example of how our strategic needs really kind of dictated that we find a space, and it was a little bit, it has been a little bit contentious. I see a question here from Justin that says if there has been pushback, has it been more from staff, faculty, students? And if you're talking there specifically about pushback about the academic commons, there has been a little bit of pushback with or due to taking space away from the traditional library services and dedicating them to the gateway and to a collaborative function there. I would say that the students were just very concerned about losing the collaborative space that they had gained in 2006 with the addition of the Learning Commons in there. But when we were able to assure them that they would not lose any of that collaborative space, then they were okay. I think that the staff has been impacted, and there has been some disgruntlement there. They no longer, I think it's difficult for them because they were trained as librarians, and they see their role being changed. Change is always difficult. Rick might be able to speak a little bit more to that. And the faculty they still are wondering, well, what about the traditional library? that's been what we grew up with. That was the center of academic learning. And what we try to say is, well, that's what the academic commons is now. It's just a different way of learning than when we were students at the undergraduate level.
Yeah, if I could just kind of, I think, Linda, you spoke to that issue really well. And one of the things that we really had to attend to as we moved into the academic commons was to think about how it affected all of those groups. And so, for example, with students, they will actually have more study and collaboration space when we get done. And we've accomplished that really by looking really carefully at the way that we manage our collection and what's being housed where. Some things that are seldom or may perhaps never used are now in compact shelving. Some things have gone from print to electronic, and we're keeping backup print copies off-site. So there are a variety of ways we've accomplished that, but we really needed to think about how we create more space within the building, and that has really been about managing the physical collection. And I really have to thank our library director and the staff there did a tremendous amount of work to really think through how to manage the physical collection so that we could really accommodate all these additional things. We also had the benefit that not every school does of having a fairly large library facility to start with, so we had some space that could be repurposed. And I also, it is a hard thing for the library staff. I think it really is. It's a real shift in understanding of the building and the facility in a way. Now we have a facility, the Academic Commons, that's really shared by 4 different functions if you include the student study and collaboration space. So on the one hand, it's really vital space. We see a lot more student traffic. In fact, people use more of the library services because there are more students there. So we're seeing actually a much bigger uptake in library services because of the change. But it has really changed the nature of the library. It's not the library that I remember when I was in school, that's for sure.
You know, it's interesting that Rick mentions the library that he remembers when he was in school. And one of the things that I've found as I've worked with my own organizations and other organizations that are sort of wrestling with the changes happening in libraries is that our notion of what a library is somewhat different and somewhat historical and romantic. And, you know, when somebody mentions the word library, are they talking about the building or the set of services or the set of resources inside or the people who are there? Or is it a place to study? You know, what exactly do they mean by that term? But the changes that are happening now are dramatically shifting that notion or those notions of a library, and there's some trade-offs being made. We had a situation here at Ursinus where there was a desire to turn the library into something more than it was, and to also sort of reverse a trend of taking space for sort of the next space need on campus out of the library, and let's step back and think about what really should occur in the library. And so we're about I think a year or 2 behind where Allegheny is now in their gateway project and doing very similar things. And, you know, we got some pushback from faculty about the books that would have to be removed to make way for this new vision. And, you know, we invited them into a process to weed the collection. It hadn't been weeded in quite a while, and so we brought them into a process that said, take a look at what's here and tell us what's valuable. And we got a lot of feedback from the faculty that while there was some good stuff in the collection, there was a lot of extraneous stuff that didn't deserve to be there. And so we actually engaged them in a process to help us figure out what needed to stay here and what didn't deserve the space. And so we were able to avoid some of that pushback by just, you know, being open with our information and helping people see it in a different kind of way. Similarly, what, you know, pushback you might get from students could, I think, as Rick and Linda described, if you can help people understand that we may be moving some of this space, some of these resources around, but you're largely going to have access to the same kind of study facilities that you've had before. They'll just be in different locations. If they can see that larger picture, you can sort of quickly sidestep the pushback you might get and still move change through in an effective kind of way.
If I could add just one more thing, another principle that I think was really important, and this was established early on, probably 5 or 6 years ago, when we started to, you know, use the compact shelving and things like that. They started emphasizing much more access as opposed to owning. And
Yes.
If we can get access, then does it really matter whether the book is in our own collection or not? That made a big difference for, that really did serve to put many of the fears to rest, perhaps not all of them. What Jean also said about involving them in the weeding out of the collection, that was very, very important at Allegheny too.
So I just want to point out, I see this as a great success. I just got the provost to talk about access instead of owning books, which is part of what I'm talking about. The conversation needs to be outside the the LITS organization. It needs to engage the senior leadership at all levels, or people at all levels. So thanks, Linda. That was great.
Well, it makes a lot of sense to me.
Thank you. And I see Dave has asked a question. If you asked faculty what the biggest challenge they face, what would they say, and what would a student say? Jean, do you want to take a stab at that?
Well, and I'd kind of like to ask Dave if he could reply in what context is because I think that faculty are going to have the normal challenges that they face in terms of too many things on their plate, not enough time to effectively manage all of their responsibilities. Are you talking about in terms of the digital environment that we're providing on campus, or access to library resources? The research and teaching. Actually, I'm going to ask Linda to respond to that one.
I think that that's really at the heart of the access as opposed to ownership. Our director of the library, when, again, this was 5 or 6 years ago, and we found ourselves in the situation of having to downsize some of the journals that we have because they were just becoming so expensive. And she went to, I know there's a term for it, but I forget what it is, and she went to this bundling of journals. And again, it was access. It wasn't necessarily ownership. And the fact, what we thought was going to be a terrible process actually ended up as a great boon. We ended up, after we've been doing this for 5 or 6 years, we end up now having access to many, many more journals and resources than we did before. The criticism I've heard in response to that is, well, we can't just walk around the stacks and browse. And I suppose that that's true. I don't know how to get around that, though. And so I think otherwise, really, the environment for research and teaching and the resources there, I think that they're better now than they were 5 or 10 years ago.
I think another thing that comes up among the faculty that I talk to in terms of the context for their research and teaching, particularly research, are issues around the digital humanities. And as more things become digital, how should we how do we support that? And what is what's an appropriate level of support? What is it we need to be doing? And that's a really hard question. And so I know that's on a lot of different institutions have talked about that, but that's certainly something that some of our faculty are talking about. In terms of access to research materials, I think Linda's right. I think what we see, at least we participate in surveys of our faculty and students, that they're finding the resources they need. From my perspective, observing the students, it's always, or talking with the staff who work with them, helping students find the right resources is always good, and to stay at it, to use good search strategies. I mean, it's your basic information literacy kinds of things come up again and again among students.
Dave, responding to your point about the students in terms of success at college, many of the students today seem more confident in their own skills than perhaps is valid in terms of their ability to do the right research, to search for the material they need. They're happy to look on their own and find something and make use of it. And I think that provides some frustrations for faculty as well. Getting them in to talk to experts who can help them refine their search strategies and to do a more effective job of finding the material they need as opposed to the material they want can be really helpful. But I think that another thing that students face, although they may not be willing to admit it if we were to ask them this, is realizing they need help but not knowing where to get it. And if they're struggling with writing a paper, is it a problem with writing? Is it a problem with research? Is it a problem with the technology they're using? And trying to avoid having to send them in 3 different places in 3 different parts of campus to go get support. If there's one simple place where they can go and get support, like was true at the Learning Commons at Allegheny and other places, that they can actually work through that need, that challenge that they have with some expert help that they may be able to step back and say, well, here's where we can help.
Great. We have a question from Krista. I'm very interested in the implications of the paper for professional development. Any thoughts about strategies for helping academic staff, whether library, IT, faculty, or other, keep current so that they can provide career planning support to students in a rapidly changing marketplace? Rick, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I was just trying to come up with a succinct answer to that one. I think certainly professional development is something that I think a lot about, like with my own staff, in terms of making sure they have the opportunities they need to stay current. And so, and a lot of effort, and it's not really, again, on both sides. We have to think about, we can't just, and I should also clarify that we're not asking the library and IT staff to be assisting students with career planning necessarily, though we have something like, say, career education will be part of the academic commons. We are asking people to know how to facilitate connections. So if a student comes in and they're meeting with a reference librarian or one of the writing consultants or someone, and that the student mentions a particular need, so a student writing a paper, if it becomes clear to the writing consultant that they don't have the resources they need to really make their argument, my hope is that we've been able to train the writing consultant so they'll take them over to the reference desk or help them make an appointment with the reference librarian to find more resources. So that's the kind of thing that I hope we can do around, again, gets down to that communication and facilitation, collaboration, strength in that. And so one of the things I have been doing, and we have been doing a lot of, is asking our faculty, or our staff to go to more training opportunities like the EDUCAUSE initiatives for management training kinds of things. Many of the staff on the IT side have gone to that, and I think that's been really helpful for them in kind of developing their collaboration and facilitation skills. It's also helped them in just being more connected to the currents of change in the profession, and I think that's really important that we stay engaged professionally at all levels of the staff. And so, and that cuts to the technical training. We can't ignore that. There are so many new things that are emerging. We have to invest a fair amount in helping our staff stay current in what's happening in the profession, because otherwise it'll move past them too quickly. And we'll find that they're not prepared for what hits us next. Gene, do you have anything to add to that?
One thing that comes to mind for that, the issue of professional development, and I'm thinking about it in terms of our staff, is the need to become better partners on campus and become more collaborative. And I think this is true of many of us in the IT profession and some in the library profession, that it is they don't necessarily have the skills to be able to collaborate or partner on an effective level with people from all across campus. And I think one of the things that we had to wrestle with is the notion that people skills or soft skills are not necessarily valued by people who have high degrees of specialized training and skill sets. And so how do you focus on those skills in a way that still leverages the importance of them and their being able to do their work, but it's not necessarily at the same kind of skills that they normally would have appealed to them in their particular discipline. One of the things we did at a previous institution was to start talking about the collaborative skills that we needed to be able to work well with people, to understand their needs, to resolve conflicts, to negotiate priorities, a variety of different skills that helped our staff become much more collaborative partners than they could before they had those experiences. So I think that's an area for us to focus on.
I guess if I could add one more thing, I think sometimes we overlook the easy, not necessarily easy, but the places on our campuses where our staff could connect more. So for example, we have a committee that focuses on facilities and finance. And so they look at kind of the big plans, the master planning for facilities, the annual budget cycle goes through that committee. It's a great place to have staff involved in that committee because they get a sense of what are the institutional priorities. It's much easier to do collaboration and help connect with people across campus if you have an understanding of what their priorities are. So that's a great committee for staff to get a different view of the institution than what they might see from inside the LITS organization. The similar curriculum committee is another great place to connect. Academic support committee that we have, which looks at faculty development, is another great place. These are just good places for employees to get a broader vision of the institution. It's really important to have that broad vision, not just for the CIO, but for really for everyone in the organization.
Thank you. We're coming up on 2 o'clock, so I appreciate all of the wonderful questions. Thank you all for contributing the questions. For anyone who has not yet read the white paper, you can actually click on the link on this slide and it will take you to the white paper. I do want to thank our audience for your questions and for joining us today, and I would like to give a hearty round of virtual applause to our speakers, Rick Holmgren, Jean Spencer, and Linda Demerit. Thank you all. This concludes today's webinar.